Do you mind if I bring a community leader on as a
We're live
panel?
now. We're live now.
Long that would be great. Absolutely. Good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Greenwald. It looks like we're at 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started with our February DeKalb Dems webinar. Tonight's topic, Lessons Learned from Minneapolis, Protecting Our Neighbors and Ourselves. This is an ongoing series of a variety of topics that we offer through DeKalb Democrats, and we have a fantastic group of panelists to discuss this topic. Thank you all so much for sharing part of your evening. I will start by sharing at least some of the objectives that we have. These are just some of the things we're going to cover today. Some common myths regarding immigrants in the United States. You should be able to differentiate between different categories of immigrants, to know what your legal rights are when observing or encountering ICE, and how to alert others effectively when ICE is active in your area. We're going to cover this and more. There will be plenty of topics to cover. But before we get started, I want to share something with you. It's going to pop up in your link, and that is in your chat, and that is a link to a quiz. And the quiz is there for you. Nobody's going to be scoring you except for yourself. It's covering the material that we're going to present. So if you like to do that kind of thing, it might be helpful in terms of following along. You can do it as an open book test now, or you can simply do it as a post test when you're done, but a way to just kind of review all the information. There's a lot to cover. So to start with, I'm going to talk about 4 myths about immigration. And after we cover those myths in immigration and a little bit about what's been going on lately, we're going to turn to our panelists to talk about what's going on currently in 2026. But to start with, I want to get a common understanding about these myths, immigrants and the economy. Do immigrants pay their fair share of taxes? Do they steal jobs? Do they take subsidies away from us? What about immigration and crime, immigration and voting? Are they voting illegally? And immigrants and democratic policy, the open borders myth. Because I hope that we walk away from this not only having a shared understanding, but also being armed with some of the facts so that you can have good conversations with people who are a little confused about this. I'm going to warn you, though, that I'm going to speak very quickly to cover all of this in a short period of time. It's a lot, but we're going to put it out there, and you'll be able to see it again as we are recording this tonight, and it'll be available on YouTube. To start out with some definitions, lawful permanent residents, LPRs, otherwise known as green card holders. These are people who are lawfully here to work permanently in the U.S. but aren't citizens yet. Non-immigrants can include temporary visitors, such as we have specific visas like students or temporary workers. Refugees and asylees are those fleeing persecution, refugees from abroad and asylees from within the U.S. And undocumented immigrants are those in the United States without legal authorization. We can also define migration based on the reason. Family-based immigrants are joining their family. Employment-based are coming for specific jobs, often those that are priorities for us. Humanitarian immigrants, as I mentioned just before. Diversity immigrants include those who are coming from countries with low rates of immigration to the U.S. A migrant is a general term for anyone who is moving, while an immigrant usually implies someone who's permanently relocated. And a displaced person is someone who is forced to flee but remains within their own borders, not crossing international lines like refugees. Overall, if you zoom out and look at the patterns of immigration over the last 140 years, you'll see that we have gone up and down quite a lot, with a peak in 1890 at 14.8% of the population being that from immigrants. Different pools of immigrants than we have currently. It was a nadir in 1970 when it was down to under 5% and then went up again and now is over 14% once again. Where do these people come from? This is a map that shows you a comparison about what it was like 100 years ago versus today. 100 years ago, the largest group of immigrants in Georgia were from Russia or related countries around Russia. And you can see for yourself the diversity that occurred at that time. Fast forward 100 years now, and we see that Mexico is by far and away the largest group, although number 2 to that is India and other countries as well. So America has always had a diverse array of immigration from a number of different countries, although that has not always been equitably distributed. I'm not going to get into all of the laws, but I do think there are some seminal laws that are important in any discussion about immigration. The 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act was important because it opened up immigration to Asia and Latin America. That was prior to that really limited, and we were preferential to those coming from Northern and Western Europe. The Refugee Act of 1980 adopted the UN's definition of refugees, trying to influence our approach to asylees and refugees. We had a big spike starting in the 1970s in unauthorized immigration, and many of the people who came before 1982 acquired legal status after the passage of the 86 Immigration and Reform Act. President Bush in 1990 signed the Temporary Protective Status Program. That's something you've probably heard of recently as well. People fleeing natural disasters and other concerns to live in the country, live in the U.S. until their country was recovered. And of course, President Obama's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, or DACA, the one that you're probably most familiar with. Immigration enforcement. It seems like ICE has been around for a long time, but it's not the case. This was a creation after 9/11, and in 2003, basically, Border Patrol and ICE assumed the functions of INS and the U.S. Border Patrol, and they are defined based on where they operate. The Border Patrol being at ports of entry and 100 miles within the U.S. borders, and ICE being more in the interior. But that definition is not always followed rigorously, as we've seen in recent weeks. So in summary, we've had a long history of immigration from a variety of nations. I think America has, by and large, stood out in that regard. Our immigration volumes have ebbed and flowed, both with the reasons why people are fleeing to their countries, but also the reactions that we have in our countries and the restrictions we've placed on them. So let's talk about some of those myths. Number one, immigrants are a drain on the U.S. economy. It turns out that immigrants actually exceed their weight in terms of working in the U.S. They make up, in 2023, just over 14% of the population, but 17.7% of the workforce, especially in agriculture and construction. But not only those, they are actually overrepresented in our healthcare system as well. And we have a huge segment of immigrant-founded and immigrant-owned companies making up nearly a quarter of entrepreneurs, with an impressive combined income, and even founding 40% of Fortune 500 companies and nearly 30% of patents in recent years. So a tremendous contribution to our economy in that regard as well. And it turns out that Americans, by and large, in polls appreciate that. 75% of Americans oppose making cuts to our legal immigration system. They say that immigration is good for our country, and we know it's the case because of our aging population. We simply can't sustain ourselves without more workers. And that's one of the reasons why immigrants are so crucial for our economy. The Congressional Budget Office has also provided some important information about what would happen if we have a surge in immigration. GDP would be boosted by $8.9 trillion. However, if we have a decrease, we'll have a similar kind of slowing, and a mass deportation would be devastating, reducing real GDP by as much as 7% by 2028 if we had severe labor shortages in industries such as agriculture and construction. And on taxes, it turns out that immigrants, by and large, documented and undocumented, pay a significant amount to taxes, whether or not they actually get the benefits of those taxes, to Social Security, to Medicare, overall combined spending power of nearly $300 billion. Immigrants are contributing tremendously at the state, federal, and local levels across the board. So in summary, we need immigrants desperately for our labor force. They make up a tremendous amount currently. The studies that we have show minimal, if any, kind of impact on native-born wages. Immigrants often are filling complementary jobs that aren't being filled by U.S.-born citizens. They contribute tremendously to our tax base and receive very few of the benefits that you would otherwise get making that contribution. Next, on to crime, immigration and crime. A recent Stanford study showed, looking back to 1880, so 140 years, that by and large, immigrants have always had a lower incarceration rate than their native-born or white U.S.-born counterparts. It has been a difference of up to 30% less at some points, including recent years, and when you compare the different groups. Immigrants and voting. A Heritage Foundation study looked at 1,500 cases of alleged voter fraud since 1980s. Only 68 cases had anything to do with non-citizens. They found the rate over a 48 period to be below 0.0001%. Most of these had to do with people who are lawful permanent residents who were receiving bad information and being encouraged to vote when they actually wouldn't should not have been. But that doesn't stop people from citing this as a rampant problem, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Because it's obvious to those who are doing strategy that immigrants are a significant role in our voter outreach and results. If you look at battleground states, 14% of the voters in Nevada, 7% in Georgia, and 5% in Michigan and Pennsylvania are foreign born. This is a large number of people. If you looked at 2020, Georgia had 96,000 new citizens, way dwarfing the margin that Biden had in his victory over Trump at that time. So this is a considerable part of our electorate and growing. And so, of course, there's a reason why there's so much focus of attention. And then finally, immigrants and the Democratic policy positions. You've heard this before that Barack Obama was the deporter in chief. And in fact, he did deport a lot of people during his tenure and did so with fairly limited resources because the Congress was not willing to supply any legislative solutions at the time. But less known is that actually Biden's immigration policy was even larger. Combining deportations with expulsions and other actions. The only president that came close was George W. Bush's administration in his second term. And I'm going to show you a graph of what that looks like. Biden did it in a little bit different way than previous administrations. And that's what this graph shows you right now. And that they come in different forms, whether or not it's removals, returns, administrative returns, Title 42 expulsions during COVID. But if you look at a comparison rate, the thought that any Democratic president was an open borders president is just patently absurd, and Joe Biden, none the least of them. So in summary, our immigration debate is quite complicated, but we know that immigration is good and essential for our country. We know the patterns have changed over the years, mostly driven by conditions at the country of origin, and that we know that we have failed to provide an effective and humane way to screen and to integrate immigrants into our country on a consistent basis. Republicans over decades, it's not just during Trump, but over decades, they succeeded in making this a culture war, false claims about crime, economics, and voting instead of negotiating really effective solutions. And now that brings us to Donald Trump. Immigration policy in 2025 changed dramatically in a number of regards in border enforcement and detention, in expansion of deportation, a 600% increase in community-based interior immigration enforcement, and legal immigration restrictions affecting travel bans over 12 countries. Steps taken to revoke that temporary protective status for a number of countries, placing over 1 million people in our country at risk of deportation, introducing onerous fees to people who are here because of seeking asylum and refugee issues. Where else is money coming from? From that one horrible bill passed last summer, $170 billion, $30 billion for detention and deportation of immigrants quickly, $45 billion for new immigrant detention facilities, $47 billion for more border wall and other barriers, $16 billion for security, $14 billion to the state and local agencies, $12 for Border Patrol, and $11 billion to DHS, with the Office of Refugee Resettlement getting a paltry $330 million to help vet unaccompanied children. So a lot of money going to a lot of places in really an unprecedented way. The ramifications of that, as you all know, if you've been paying attention to the news, is a dramatic increase in the number of people held in ICE detention on any given day, increasing by over 75% in just the past year. By the end of November of last year, ICE was using 104 more facilities for immigration detention, a 91% increase. Dramatically changing the profile of who's being arrested, increasingly using this at-large arrest approach by 600%, sweeping up a lot of people who should not be in that group by any definition, and enough funding to operate more than 135,000 detention beds through the end of fiscal year 2029. There has been over a 2,450% increase in the number of people with no criminal record being held in ICE detention on any given day. And the no release system that Trump's executive order passed as well, causing a decrease in discretionary releases. So I'm going to end that presentation right now. You all, we can address some of these issues when you all would like in the course of our conversation or at any time. But next, what I'd like to do is introduce our panelists. I am so excited to share with you four of our outstanding members of the Democratic coalition in the House of Representatives. And in no particular order, I'm going to start introducing them one at a time, and then we're going to start our conversation. Representative Long Tran represents my district, House District 80 in the Georgia Assembly. That's Dunwoody, Doraville, and one precinct in Chambly. He currently serves as secretary for the DeKalb House delegation and serves on the following committees: Creative Arts and Entertainment, Natural Resources and Environment, Technology, and Infrastructure Innovation. His past endeavors include being a small business owner, an experienced IT professional, turned actor and stunt driver in the Georgia film industry. And he has dedicated years of empowering immigrant and disadvantaged families along the Beaufort Highway corridor through nonprofit work. Representative Tran, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'll let you introduce the other panelists before talk about my experience in Minnesota and some of the things we can do here in Georgia.
Thank you. Representative Marvin Lim represents House District 98 in Norcross, and he has a lot of DeKalb connections, actually. He serves on the following committees: Agriculture and Consumer Affairs, Appropriations, Health, and Retirement. His family immigrated to Georgia when he was 7. He was salutatorian at Lakeside High School in DeKalb, graduated magna cum laude from Emory University, then graduated from Yale Law School, and became a Fulbright Scholar and a term member on the Council of Foreign Relations. His professional journey includes roles at Catholic Charities, doing job development for refugees and immigrants, the ACLU of Georgia, and the Giffords Law Center to prevent gun violence, and at the law firm of Holcomb and Ward, where he worked alongside State Representative Scott Holcomb on cases seeking to protect the integrity of our elections. Representative Lim, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Happy to be here.
Representative Mary Ann Santos represents the House District 117. She describes herself as the first Latina elected from Henry County in Georgia and serves on the committees of Code Revision, Juvenile Justice, and State Properties. She earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice leadership from Mercer University, a graduate degree from Clayton State University, and her career experience includes working as a court clerk, legal assistant in the prosecutor's office, and legal officer administrator. She describes herself as a mom, a domestic violence survivor, and a first-generation public servant. Representative Santos, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not least, Representative Gabriel Sanchez represents House District 42, which is, I suppose, the furthest away from here in DeKalb. He represents Smyrna and Cumberland and parts of South Marietta. He serves on budget and fiscal affairs oversight, government affairs and interstate cooperation committees. He was born and raised in Cobb County to Colombian immigrants. He's a lifelong community organizer and advocate for working people. Representative Sanchez, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so this is the best part. I'm going to do less talking and turn it over to our panelists, and I'm going to just throw it open. And I guess we could start with Representative Tran, but I hope to hear from everybody about this. Could you just give our audience a sense about what kinds of immigration-related concerns you've been hearing lately? What are our neighbors dealing with, and how have you been coping with them, trying to help them?
So, the economic impact is definitely starting to be felt within our undocumented community, especially along Beaufort Highway and Clarkston. Folks are now afraid to go to work, and in some cases, they're just not able to go to work because the business has shut down or they've been replaced by other employees. And we will eventually hit a point in which people's financial needs to pay rent and get food and supplies for their children and for themselves will hit a critical point where just charity from our community won't be enough. And so that fear is probably the biggest sentiment that people have, along with, of course, wondering when Georgia is going to start looking like Minnesota.
Yeah, and I can jump in here as well. So, we've seen a lot of cases go through our office as well, and a lot of just suffering, frankly. You know, including they did detain and deport a family friend of ours as well in my district, and we did manage to at least get one person out of detention a few months ago who was kidnapped from his home when he was home alone, and a Venezuelan father who had married into a family of U.S. citizens, was a very kind person. It was a very traumatizing event for the family. Fortunately, he has been brought home, but with a lot of trauma now because of that. That won't never go away. So it's been very distraught, honestly. And we're doing everything we can in our office and my colleagues as well to alleviate these issues. And I'm going to be talking more about that, of course, as well.
Yeah, I will echo all of that. I'll give a few specific examples. Just in the last week, I think they're right outside my district, but I had two U.S. citizens that were picked up, we believe, directly by ICE, which was trying to get more information. I had a constituent who had lawful status as an asylee, showed up to his regularly scheduled check-in with USCIS last May, and then ended up being shuttled through 3 different prisons or detention centers and ultimately deported. I've had people that called very minor things, you know, as little as like domestic disturbances, and then ultimately either the person was exonerated from that and then they were deported, or the person calling was, you know, picked up by not necessarily ICE directly, but as you may know, with HB 1105 signed in 2024, there is some mandated local law enforcement cooperation, particularly with our county and municipal jails. So they do have to respond to ICE detainer requests. And so we've seen many different examples, about 3 categories of which I've given, in which people are law-abiding and getting ultimately deported. And of course, there are those people that are, whatever their status is, very afraid, as Representative Tran and Representative Sanchez have said, there are people that are not showing up to work. My nonprofit does an English as a second language class. Last January, we immediately saw a 50% reduction in attendance that has never recovered. You see a lot of these different stories, and we also hear from businesses of a variety of different, well, varieties, saying, oh, it's been really difficult for us to get people to come to work, or to show up, just because of, you know, hearing from their workers about the fear that they might be picked up, even again, regardless of their lawful status. So it's affecting obviously our workforce, our jobs, our businesses, our schools, our, you know, nonprofit and community programs. It's obviously having a lot of effect even. And the last thing I'll say for now is, even though this might not be as visible to a lot of us, because it is very hard, we can get this later, it's very hard to figure out what's going on. And by the time you might show up, they might be gone. But it's that culture of fear that has really, really impacted people, and rightfully so, into living their daily lives.
And I will add that I have heard from other survivors who have mentioned to me that they are afraid to report crimes. They're afraid to continue with any proceedings that they're currently in, that they have also been threatened by the other parents, that if they continue, that they will call immigration on them. And it's just very unfortunate that the access to these services are now being clouded by what is happening. I do think that everyone deserves the right to be safe. And currently, a lot of people, not just in our immigrant community, but overall, are afraid to see federal agents outside, because if, as we have seen, this is very traumatizing, I think, to the average person that's seeing this happen across all channels, social media, television. And when you see them in your city, you start remembering all these things you've seen. So I've also heard a lot of confusion, people wanting to confirm, is this a rumor? Is this true? Are they here? And what I tell people is to always just share the knowledge that you have about knowing your rights, and always just be prepared to know what to do in those cases.
Yeah. And the comment that was made about that it seems invisible, I imagine it's certainly the experience of so many people that they wouldn't necessarily run into a family that is experiencing this unless they had a reason to, that they were a neighbor or a friend, or at work. I was just thinking, it made me think about a patient I took care of in the emergency department recently who was there, a girl who was identified as being truant from high school. She was incredibly anxious ever since her father got deported, and her mother, who did not have a way to sustain a living, was about to get evicted from their home, and she was terrified to go back to school because she was afraid of what might happen. These are real stories happening around us, but we may not always be visible. Rep Tran, I wanted to get back to Minneapolis if I could. You were there not too long ago, and I always wonder about the contrast between what we see on the news and what you see on the ground when you're actually there. What do you think you saw that we wouldn't have appreciated, and what did you gain from it?
I don't think the news accurately presents how large of an ICE presence is there. You can't feel 3,000 federal agents out on the streets. What you see on the news looks like maybe a couple dozen or maybe 100. 3,000 is huge. You go for blocks and you see these people. It's like seeing them on Beaufort Highway, but then also seeing them in College Park and all the way up to Gainesville. It's the breadth of this is gigantic. And what we don't see in Georgia are things like door-to-door knocking. They're doing very broad sweeps in Minnesota, and it's not just two agents going down one street. It is dozens of agents going down multiple blocks at the same time. Just the scope that we see there, it's troubling. The media can't show just how large that is. And then there are things that happen that we don't see on the news. As I was walking with other reps down the street that Renee Good and Alex Preddy were killed on. I talked to business owners. Some of them had been tackled by ICE in the back of their restaurant as they were taking out the trash. And they're convinced ICE just did it for fun. ICE says they did it because they thought they were someone they were chasing. But there's no cameras back there. There's no media. There's no protesters or observers to see what happens. And so what happens in the shadows to me is very disturbing because it becomes your word as a business owner or as just someone living in the area versus ICE. And it can be intimidating to want to stand up and complain for yourself. And so what I saw in Minnesota is something, Minnesota is going to be ground zero as to what can come to Georgia and what can't. And so, yeah, it's incredible.
And I wonder if we can anticipate how it might look the same and how it might look different in Georgia. What kind of differences in terms of the agreements with local law enforcement might make a difference with local city governments, local governments, with our different laws about what happens if you protest? What would we anticipate in a Georgia experience?
So I think something important to put into context is that Georgia already has the fourth highest, largest amount of arrests in the entire country.
Mm.
So we've already been seeing a lot of activity. The difference is that there hasn't been as much like headline grabbing events happening here. There's a lot of this administration's show of force is to purposely show off, so as a scare tactic, and this is me, kind of in my own personal opinion, but it seems like they're focused on quote unquote blue states with those kind of tactics, right? Whereas here in Georgia, they have been doing it in much more, at least it doesn't get as much media attention outside of like the Hyundai raid, right, that happened last year. So, and a couple of others, major things. But yeah, we haven't seen the same level of like, because I think it's, for show. I think what they're doing in Minnesota is more for show than anything else to instill fear. And what I am worried that would eventually come down here as well. For now, we haven't seen it, but it doesn't mean that there's not as many people being detained. There is still a large amount of people being detained and being terrorized, and we need to continue to work on organizing around that.
I think we definitely need to be prepared. They're going to make an example out of Georgia. Exactly how, I don't know. They've got their headquarters in College Park now. They weren't shy or quiet about it. They made a huge press release about it. It's very different from in Minnesota, where they're operating out of an existing federal building. They've dropped lots of ICE-marked vehicles into Georgia. And right now, I still predominantly only see unmarked vehicles doing their operations across the country. So, why did they feel the need to have vehicles clearly marked ICE on them here in Georgia? And what's their plan with them? I haven't seen them. I've heard that people have started to see them, but I haven't seen them in any kind of concentration yet.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. While it is already happening, I think that's important, absolutely, to say that it might not be at the level of the news. It is very much happening. I mean, last year with the journalist Mario Guevara, that happened partially in DeKalb, partially in Gwinnett. That is an example of one way that it could happen, and that was perhaps one of the most visible, right? But as Representative Tran said, we know that they are also in College Park. They're going to try to have another detention center in Social Circle east of Atlanta. So even though this is already happening, and there is, unlike in some of the blue states, we mandated, like I said, some level of local law enforcement cooperation with ICE and other federal immigration authorities, DHS, et cetera. It could also, there very much could be increased militarization directly from ICE itself, even without local law enforcement cooperation. And then the other thing I will say about that, the fear of that, because there have been a couple of times where people have feared that is exactly what would happen. The most prominent one I can really think of right now is what happened in end of November, the beginning of December, when there were a lot of these unconfirmed reports that ICE was coming, and that was coinciding with, I believe it was either Dorval Police or DeKalb County Police on Pleasantdale doing, I don't know, a traffic stop or something. So even the threat of it is very much impacting people's behavior. But I think it's important for all of us to be clear, there could be that, and especially what we're seeing in Minneapolis could very much happen here, and especially with something like the World Cup coming up, that is very much a possibility.
Yeah. And I want to remind our participants, we're already seeing a number of great questions in the Q&A. That's the place to put it. So type your questions in the Q&A. We will definitely try to get to all of them, or as many as we possibly can. So Representative Lim brought up the detention center in Social Circle. I don't want to get through this hour without addressing that, because that is definitely a current event issue. Can anyone provide any updates about, it looks like that's just going to happen, although the logistics seem to be in question. Is it possible to have something that big in that facility? What is it going to look like? Or are there any obstacles to that? Does anyone have any insights into that?
It looks like they're moving very quickly. despite opposition from their local elected leaders, their city council members, even Mike Collins is against it, and they're just moving forward with it very quickly. One of the things I'm wondering is this going to be another alligator Alcatraz, where they drop millions and millions of dollars, have such horrible conditions that it gets shut down a couple months later, and it's just a big money binge for these detention center corporations. Real quickly, not to sidetrack too much, but I want to make aware to the audience. I put in two links in the chat. One is if you think someone is detained by ICE and is at a detention center, um, that link can hopefully help you find them. And then another link is if you know someone who thinks that they may have an order of removal, they should go to that link and look up and see if they have an order of removal. Knowing where, like your own legal status as an undocumented is going to be key in how you protect yourself. And of course, like every day, I'm afraid my sons will get detained, and I won't know if they were detained by ICE or not, even though they're third generation American born.
Jeez. I'm getting a flood of questions, and they're kind of coming in two different categories. One is that what can I do as just an average citizen? And the other is what can you do, meaning what can our lawmakers do? And I thought maybe we could address that one first, and you all can give us a sense about pending legislation, the kinds of things that you've been pushing for, working on, what kind of things are out there. Do any of them have a chance? Representative Sanchez, I know that you have at least a bill, if not more. If you could just explain to us what that legislation's about.
Of course, and I also put in the chat the hotline from GLAR, who does a lot of important work in the community as well for anyone who needs support. So I introduced House Bill 889, which requires that ICE be publicly identifying themselves when they're doing their work, because we've seen a lot of people kidnapping off the streets in plain clothes or in unmarked vehicles. Also prohibiting the masks as well. And I know there's been other legislation on the Senate side, as well as my colleague Representative Riceberry putting forward legislation that bans ICE from schools, hospitals, and from places of worship. But obviously, we have to do more than that to ensure that we protect our communities. And obviously, we're in with the current conditions of the majority in the legislature, the Republicans, it's, we'll see. We're going to push for it. But in the meantime, while we work on that legislation, we want to make sure we continue to fight back as a community. Community is the strongest way to push back against stuff like this, right? To authoritarian tactics. The whole point of them scaring people and having them fear is that they don't even want to get out, leave their homes. They stop interacting with society at large in general. That way you can isolate folks or have people self-deport. So the solution is to have community members, especially those who aren't as at high risk, to check in with neighbors, to come together as community and make sure people are okay and are doing okay. Because we can come together to fix that, to help each other out. And, I know that's unfortunately with the internet and everything, it makes it harder to do that, but we need to bring that back as much as we can in these times. And to me as well, know your rights, like Representative Santos was mentioning earlier, and others, that making sure you're doing know your rights education to folks as much as possible, and have those cards that I believe someone linked earlier as well, that you can print out yourself and provide to people, and they have it in many different languages, right? And so we've put out that information as well. And then my office, as well, along with Representative Makia McQueen, we hired an immigrant liaison specifically for any immigrant issues, so that if you need someone directly to contact to connect you to the right resources or help you with anything, we can do what we can to help you with those issues, or if you know anyone who needs that help. So I'll put that email in the chat as well. And like I said, we have to work together to fight back against this. So
thank you. I've got some lawyer questions for you guys, so I'm going to need your help. People want to know, how is it possible that it's legal for ICE to break windows of cars and drag people out of their cars. How is it legal for them to pick up their kids at school and bait their parents for arrest, to pick people up from where they work? It seems that without a warrant, this at all should be not allowed. Is there a role for any state legislation to make that point?
Marvin, you want to take this?
Sure, it's not legal, but what is legal and what is done and what is accepted are essentially three different things. Courts have repeatedly stated that not only, judicial warrants are the warrants required under the Fourth Amendment, ICE goes ahead and does no knock, no warrants anyway. Courts have stated that there are limitations to ICE detainer requests. That's ICE DHS Form I-247. Courts have repeatedly stated these things, and a lot of great folks and partners have litigated these things. But this is an administration that, in and outside of immigration, has shown that the rule of law is not a thing. To the question of whether there is state legislation that can do something about it, to an extent, yes. It's quite, the lawyer answer is this is already the law. And so we can pass a law saying this is the law still, and this applies in immigration, and that can be very, very important. I think equally as practical, if not more so, is to think through, well, where are the points of intervention? So I believe the most recent poll showed that it's either 65 or 6% of Americans, 65 or 66% of Americans, excuse me, have stated that ICE is going too far. So for temporarily, at least, the tide of American opinion is on the side of justice with respect to this issue. So where are the points of intervention, and what can we all do together? So at the federal level, we know that most recently the funding package that was passed is temporarily funding DHS. That was done to prevent a government shutdown, but the government will then revisit funding for DHS in a week and a half. So that's a point of intervention. And those that wrote into their senators, the representatives last week, at the beginning of last week, to ensure that it wasn't fully refunded automatically, did something that was very, very important. So then at the state level, please write in on all of these bills, because there are people among our colleagues, and I will say particularly on the House side, that are very sympathetic to the plight of immigrants, what we are talking about. There is the power of their party, right? Republicans, but there are people that want to, even if it's like an economic way, they want to protect their agriculture or their farm or whatever. There are people that are self-interested enough or have some level of similarity in values, but hearing from you all, even if you don't think a bill will get a hearing or whatever, shows that there is that energy, that American opinion poll of 66% is mirrored, if not more so, among Georgians. So that is something that you can write on at the state level, certainly with respect to your legislators, but also with respect to your executive branch. Something that I've been trying to track down is, while none of our state funding, we do fund private prisons, none of our state funding goes towards those private prisons, detention facilities in Georgia. There is enough of a connection there that can we use that as a point of intervention at the state level? Our state Department of Public Safety, among other people in that, the Georgia State Patrol, they have what's a so-called 287G cooperation agreement with ICE. Is there a point of intervention there? I mean, I would argue yes, but that's something that you can work on. And then finally, at your local level, whether it's your county, whether it's your sheriff or your local law enforcement, county or city, and then of course, and particularly in DeKalb, with what we've seen happening within schools, there are a lot of people that are afraid and are not feeling that even among democratically led bodies that they are feeling protected enough. What can we do in our own local jurisdictions to push for those protections? And again, I'll close by saying, a lot of these legal protections should already be there, but the fear of retribution, retaliation, whatever, is not only making our constituents, some of our constituents who already have the least protections be rightfully afraid, but it's making those in greater positions of power be afraid to act in the morally or the correct way. So there are, I think, a lot of points of political intervention there.
So I have to have a follow-up for you, Representative Lim, because you mentioned something that the audience may not be familiar with, the 287G. Could you explain that, what that is? And also, is there a way that we could find out which communities or police departments have those arrangements? Is that a public information that we could find out?
Yeah, so the 287G is a type of agreement between government authorities, whether state or local, and ICE to have state or local law enforcement or whatever the entity is participate in the enforcement of our federal immigration laws. For example, the 287G agreement I referenced earlier between ICE and our Georgia Department of Public Safety deputizes about 1,500 to 2,000 DPS officers to essentially act as ICE agents. And you'll read in the agreement in there, so sometimes they won't need warrants. So that's codified in their agreement. There are a lot of different types of agreements, and under HB 1105, which I mentioned earlier, that law at least requires local law enforcement to enter into conversation with ICE, even though, to be clear, they don't have to sign an agreement. There is at least some requirement to enter into those conversations. So there are local government authorities, and some of it is publicly available, where you can see, ICE used to publish a lot more of these agreements. They've since, I've noticed, taken some off their website. And I've made open records requests. That has been of no help, but you can at least find some of these agreements existing. But I also want to be clear that an agreement does not have to exist legally or contractually for there to be that level of cooperation. I'm 99.9% sure, for example, that where I sit, Gwinnett County Sheriff, despite my disdain for their cooperation with ICE, they don't have an actual agreement. But you also don't need an agreement to break the rule of law or to participate in all this when you have a federal government that wants you to do that. So, and unfortunately, that is not, I've made open records request there too. That's not necessarily going to be there. So it's not even as much the agreement as noting what those practices are of our localities, what they are and are not doing. Because again, they have to do some level of cooperation, but at no point does HB 1105, for example, require someone like DeKalb County Police that's doing like a traffic stop. While in some instances they may have to verify lawful status, at no point are we requiring them in that context to contact ICE. Yet we know some localities are, and that often comes, again, not necessarily from an agreement, but having your ear to the ground.
Let me add a little bit to that. Every state has a different reciprocal relationship with federal agents. In Minnesota, they actually have a very expansive reciprocal relationship in which federal agents have the exact same powers as local law enforcement, which means they can do traffic stops, they can detain you, they can charge you with obstruction at the local level. In Georgia, it's not quite that reciprocal. It takes a little bit of a higher standard for a federal agent to do a traffic stop in Georgia, and then there's other states where federal agents cannot do a traffic stop at all. And so it varies from state to state. On a side note, I want to talk about the community leaders and the organizers, and even us as electeds and the fear of retribution. Some of our organizers in the community are undocumented immigrants. And right now we know ICE is tracking people. They're observing. They're out there on Beaufort Highway. They're looking at license plates of people that they think might belong to a nonprofit. Or to an organizer, and they're tracking all of this for what they're going to execute on later on. I don't know, but I do know that the first opportunity ICE has to arrest one of us state reps when we're out there standing up for our community, they're going to take advantage of that. And so it's important for you all to understand the difference between being detained and being arrested. Being arrested means you're charged with some kind of crime. Being detained means they're just holding you so that they can complete whatever investigation that they're doing. So a lot of that reasonable suspicion, detainment, investigation, if you appear to be resistant towards it, it they're taking that as their ability to smash a window. Now, I will say in Minnesota, there's something that's happening that I'd like to see happen in Georgia. In Minnesota, the trial attorneys have created a portal. Doesn't matter what ICE did to you, whether they pushed you, they broke your window, they just stared at you the wrong way. You go to this portal and they will find you a pro bono trial attorney to sue ICE. And I'd like to see something like that happen in Georgia as well. I think if there's just thousands of lawsuits against ICE for even something as simple as just pushing a person, it becomes a barrier for them to execute whatever plan that they have. And I'm talking to some trial attorneys. Hopefully, we can get some kind of pro bono portal up for people to sue ICE.
Amazing. Rep Santos, I've got a number of questions that I was hoping you could help me out with. A number of people asking about what they can do as individuals, and number of different ones I'll just throw at you and see what sticks. One person writes, "Your ideas for effective forms of resistance. Is the best thing to bear witness, to get publicity, to shame them? Should we get young people more involved?" Other people asked, what should we do if we get a heads up that ICE is in our area? How do we share that information without causing undue harm or anxiety? What is your guidance for those kind of things?
So I would advise everyone to remain as peaceful as possible, especially when you're faced with the violence, just because that gives them more power to do whatever they want to do. So always remain peaceful. You can record. I spoke with one of the consulates here from another country, and they advised that an immigrant can reach out to their consulate in Georgia and seek further advice. They do have several things that could help prepare them for just encounters if they are not here legally, for example. So I would just say to remain calm and try to record and share the information with people that you trust, advocacy groups. You can reach out to local law enforcement if you want to make sure that this was in fact not just a random person coming up and snatching someone off the street. So that's what I would suggest.
There is a bystander and observer training in Georgia, and it's something I think we need to start really expanding on because the the pool of people that are going to be observing is going to grow dramatically, I think. Whether you're a carpool mom just sitting there and you see ICE pull up to your elementary school, what do they do in that situation? That kind of training is going to be important for us as a community to get out. I can tell you in Minnesota, they do not have a singular leader pushing this movement. It is very much a community-based, non-centralized movement, and it's something we're going to have to adopt here in Georgia. We can't look for a Martin Luther King type to push this movement and save us from authoritarianism. It's going to have to be a decentralized community push where we all work together and share our resources from Dunwoody all the way down to or over to Cobb to Norcross to where Rep Santos is.
Yeah, and just as well, I know you were talking about some trainings. I know mentioning GLAR again, they have programs around that as well, and I'll see if I can find the link. I'm looking for it now.
Yeah, we've got the GLAR link and others that, boy, the chat has had so many great resources. Thank you, everybody that's putting those in. Had a question that I did not think about in preparation for this, but definitely on my mind as well. The question is, what protections can we add for election security? The statements have already been made that ICE agents will be deployed to polling locations, even though that is expressly prohibited. Is there something we can do proactively to prevent that from happening? What are your thoughts about that concern?
I don't know if we can prevent it from happening. This is using every resource possible, letting our county elections boards know that's happening, letting local police departments know. But what it comes down to is giving the courage to our voters to go to the polls regardless of who is there, to not be intimidated, because they cannot take away your vote. And this is where things are going to change, is at the polls, with mobilizing people to get out to vote, as a community, through the churches, through the nonprofits, through every organization you can think of. We're going to have to fight to make sure every person who's been removed from our voter rolls get put back on their voter rolls if they are legitimately registered to vote, because they're going to be purging. Last year's 500,000 purge is going to be tiny compared to what's coming this summer from the Secretary of State's office. And the only best way for us to fight against that is to have people check their voter registration, have people get registered to vote, and then just everyone has to vote in November. And they can put up all the barriers, but if you're bound and determined, they can't stop you.
And I wonder if we
And
could
vote
help
May
our
19th
neighbors.
as well. Sorry. This
Yeah.
primary is on May 19th as well, and judges get elected during that, and judges are also an important part. So make sure primaries and judge elections are on May 19th.
Okay. I just a thought crossed my mind. I wonder if going in groups, bringing your neighbors with you might give them some confidence. I don't know if it would prevent anything necessarily, but it might make them feel a little safer. Might be something that we could do proactively. Okay, so many great things, and we are at the top of the hour already. I want to ask for your closing thoughts about this. We have covered a lot of ground. We could probably spend more than a day on all of these different issues, and we don't have that much time. But want to just give you all thoughts, starting with Rep. Santos, because I know you might have to leave first. What do you want people to take away from all of this, and give us some hope that things are going to get better?
Yes, thank you. So I will say that there are people that are standing to help these communities and all of us at large, to be honest. And we have 4 great representatives on here. There's many more. And I just want people to remember that their voice is what's going to make a change, and share I'm not sure if we have different states, but you could go to openstates.org and share that so that everybody knows who their federal and their state representatives are, because a lot of times in these moments we may forget that really you can fight back at the ballot. And that's really what I want to leave everyone. Just know that you can voice your vote, and you can make a change, especially midterms. Thank you.
Thank you. Rep. Lim.
Earlier I addressed in some others of like what we can do politically, but I want to emphasize the point of what you can do locally. So we've talked about like know your rights, right? And if you have not distributed a know your rights card, or even had a conversation to clarify what your own rights are and the others around you, even if they're not necessarily immigrants, so that the word can get out there, that is very, very important, and like a basic level of thing. And by the way, those rights extend to many other things. The second kind of most know your rights trainings and sessions we've done is helping immigrant communities with family law, like guardianships, like emergency preparedness, essentially. It's always good to be prepared regardless of your status or your national origin, but especially that. But that takes some level, like that can be hard enough for a non-lawyer, heck, even lawyers, to navigate that. What can you do with your powers and privileges to bring very valuable information to others. So then we've also talked about, what we can do in the moment of potential resistance, whether that is recording or reporting to someone else, i.e. another organization like GLAR. And that can be very, very difficult work, especially because we've seen that, again, we've already talked about how this is a little bit more hidden because of the nature of Georgia, but also, they're going out there in my community at like 5 a.m. And, there's never enough observers that you can get that might be able to go out there at 5 a.m. on a weekday. So that is something that you can choose to participate in. And I personally think this is most important if I had to pick one, and this relates to what you said, Mike, with respect to going in groups, like there's power in numbers to the polls. That's true everywhere. Like what I want to do most of all is to help people live their daily lives. And one of the best ways we can do that is to help people with, we've helped people run errands because they were afraid. We've helped people with carpool. I would say that's probably the number one thing right now is people that are afraid to go driving. So what can we do to help people live their daily lives and really look out for each other? And that falls under this broad umbrella of mutual aid. But that should be very, very empowering because that's something that we can do in our own communities. That is what, to me, will lead to the larger systematic change, is to help people feel empowered so that they're not afraid of not being able to get their basic need of education or going to work. We need to be able to provide for those precursor needs before we build political power, really, to turn people out to the polls. And you can really play a large role in doing that in your own community.
Fantastic. Amen. Rep Sanchez.
Thank you so much for this. This has been a really important evening to talk about very important topics, and hope that we can continue stuff like this because it's going to take all of us to fight back. There's a lot more of us than there are of them. And I think it's something to remember that, just like Representative Lim mentioned, there's power in numbers and we have to come together. I think Minnesota actually does teach us a lesson as well, even though a lot of horrific things happened. At the end of the day, they were able to, at least for now, make ICE fall back and decrease their activity. And we have to continue to do that until we get them out. I know it's not as reported as much, but they have their whole, the whistle system that they have up there that really, helps alert people. And we got to develop that stuff down here. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but we have to have that organizing. I know there's a lot of people already doing that. And I've been involved in a lot of that as well. And I know my colleagues have as well. And we got to continue to build that and grow that so we're ready to protect our communities when the time comes. They have to get involved however way you can. There's different roles. There's different ways to get involved. Voting is obviously a big one. Volunteering for local charities, volunteering for local campaigns, protesting, right? Mutual aid, documenting, or if you see something, say something, right? There's so many different ways. We've provided a bunch of resources in the chat for y'all to look through and to be able to use in case something comes up, right? And I'll put a reminder as well that we do have someone in our office that you can reach out, immigration@sanchezforgeorgia.com. But there's a lot of different ways to help. And again, it could be just as simple as checking in with your neighbor and making sure they're okay. And I think we have to remember that. We have to look just in our own little micro community. You can do a lot of change. And so that's really, at the end of the day, how change is made in this country, right? It's just people coming together from the bottom up and deciding we're not going to take this anymore. So let's make sure that we do that right now. This is the time to stand up. Thank you.
Thank you. Rep Tran, last word.
Yeah. While it feels very dystopian, what we're headed into, like in Minnesota, I went to a grocery store where they had people lock the door as soon as a customer came in, and when they leave, they unlock it, and then they relock it just to keep ICE out. So I understand the dystopian feel, but have hope because there's tens of thousands of Minnesotans hitting the streets to draw the line and say, this is as bad as it's going to get. We're not going to let this spread around the country. And I went there 2 weeks ago with around 50 state reps from 27 different states to meet and discuss, not just see what was happening, but strategize and figure out how we can work to support Minnesota and defend our own communities. And I know I'm guilty of not communicating to my community as much as I probably should with the work that I'm doing, but I assure you, all of us is doing the work. We are drowning in this work, and sometimes we're just so focused we forget to let you guys know that we're doing it, but we're here, we're fighting, we're doing this work. So keep the hope. And I had one little bit that I wanted to say to close out on, and it's just escaped my mind. But do what you can. Oh, I've watched the participants on this, and at some points it's broken 90, gotten close to 100. I can tell you when I started having very small private Zooms with people, and we would blast it out hours before, these Zooms had maybe 15 people. And the town halls I'm seeing are 50 to 100. I had a town hall where no one showed up a year ago, and now people are showing up. And that gives me a lot of hope, and I hope that gives it all to you. And I want to challenge this to you. You don't have to do something big. Do your own Zoom with 4 or 5 people and, spread that hope and confidence that we can push back against this and overcome it all and be the great country that we once were. I appreciate everyone watching.
Thank you. That is a great way to conclude. I want to just express my thanks to you all, the representatives who work really long days, really hard, exhausted. I mean, you can see it on your face. It's punishing how much. It seems like you're always in a typhoon there. And it is hard to translate that into some concrete things, but the concrete things are there for us. And you've shared so much. We have so many resources. There was someone who asked a question in the chat, and we'll get this to you. How do you get your Know Your Rights card, legal immigrant resources, red cards? We have all those things available. We have a link in the chat for resources for schedule of events going on. If you want to participate in bannering, if going to your local Home Depot and protesting is your thing, there are places to do that. There are so many organizations that are already mobilizing. Please use the links provided, share, and we will, with numbers, make a huge difference. It is, when you show up to the events and you're one person, you look like a crazy person. But if you've got 20 people, it looks like a movement. And that's what it takes, is just people buying in. I'm going to share my screen one more time to show just 2 announcements before I let everybody go. And that's because we do have some events to share that I think you'll be interested in. I hope you can see this. We have our House delegation has been having these massive town halls, and the next one is coming up just on Wednesday, this Wednesday, in Lithonia at the Lou Walker Senior Center, with a huge group of representatives. And these folks show up after being at work all day long, and they stay late. This is a great opportunity to show up, to ask your questions, to hear from other people. And then we have a gubernatorial forum coming up on February 19th it's on Mobilize. So please either go in attendance, or I think it's also remotely available too. So please go to Mobilize to find that event. But the House delegation meeting, the town hall, is at the Lou Walker Senior Center in Lithonia, Georgia, this Wednesday, with a little schmoozing time at 6:30, and then the program gets started at 7. Please show up. And with that, I want to thank everybody for hanging on. This is a great turnout. We are going to share all of this. All of this is going to be available on YouTube. That link hopefully will be dropped in the chat, and you can also find it on our website. Thank you all for joining us, and join us again next time for our next webinar. Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.